Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive into the Black Madonna. Um, it's one of the most elaborate and most infamous campaigns of Cult Divinity Lost, and me, David, and my colleague here, Martin, have decided to elaborate on this. We've done a couple of episodes so far, and a new year. We're continuing, this time with the actual campaign, Session 1, The Killer's Dance. But before we go any further, um, just a quick hello. I'm David. I'm one of the two co-hosts. I'm one of the admins and organizer of Illusion HorrorCon that just passed. If you missed it, don't worry. We have recorded panel discussions about horror, about writing, about whatever. And yeah, if you're curious about what's going on for the Illusion HorrorCon throughout the year, join us in our Discord community and see what we do throughout the year. And well, Martin, who are you?
Yeah, I'm Martin. I'm horror tabletop role-playing game master, player, and enthusiast, I suppose. And yes, I can also be found at the Illusion Horror Con, and also at the when it's not the convention, the rest of the year also at the server, playing games and ranting about games, I guess.
Fantastic. Yeah, we both are also running the Black Madonna in parallel. So we basically started by talking to each other about what we should do in the campaign and decided to make this a thing. I think I'm currently on session 40 and we're just entering in the final chapter. And Martin, as far as I presume, you're on session 16 now?
Yes.
Fantastic.
And right at the end of chapter 1. Well, and also in chapter 3 and a little bit in chapter 4, but we'll talk about that another time, I guess.
Exactly. Great. So, if you're a player or want to play this amazing campaign at some point, I would recommend to stop now and send the video to your GM or your hopeful GM, because we are gonna spoil and we're gonna discuss in detail the adventure at hand. So if you don't want to know anything about the lore, the behind-the-scenes actions for GMs, then it's now your time to stop.
Yes, and our goal with this series is to support game masters who want to run the Black Madonna in Cult Divinity Lost, the latest edition of Cult, which is a system that's far more narrative-driven than the original 1990s version that was a lot more leaned a lot heavier into combat. And we will talk about how to adapt the campaign, what challenges to expect, and how to bring the horror, history, and metaphysics to life for your table.
Yep. And again, before we go further, we just want to make it clear, the Black Madonna is a very dark campaign. It contains themes of trauma, harm to children, war, abuse, death, religious imagery, gore, body horror, and so on. A classic cult campaign, one could say. Our discussion will touch on some of these subjects, and while we won't be graphic, please be advised and note that listener discretion has been advised. If any of these themes or items have known to trigger you, then feel free to skip and join us in a later part.
And we also want to make this clear that this podcast is a fan project, so we are not officially affiliated with Helmgast or the original authors of Cult. We are simply sharing our own experiences, interpretations, and advice for running the Black Madonna in Cult Divinity Lost.
Exactly. Fantastic. And yeah, I would say welcome to The Killer's Dance, dear listener. As we now actually dive into the campaign itself, we've established kind of the overall historic background. We've talked about a bit the Game Master's background story. We talked about a bit Session 0 and how things are kind of coming together. And well, now we're coming to the point where our fortunate players are meeting Magda Orlova. Magda Orlova, we talked about her in think episode one a bit, about her timeline, also in respect of the second, the historic timeline in episode two. But for you, what is kind of like as a recap maybe important to mention when we consider Magda Orlova when we start the campaign on the 14th of September 1991?
Yes, I mean Magda is really the key NPC for the beginning. She is in a way a very classic horror role-playing hook type of NPC, i.e., she is going to disappear very soon and she is going to die very soon. However, Magda also is very interesting because she embodies a lot of what the campaign is about. She is a person who has really lived a life in many ways. And if you recall our discussion of the GM's backstory from the 2 episodes ago, yes, 2 episodes ago, she is the big hero of that in a way, or she is a retired incarnate in a way. She hosted Bina, the Archon's essence in some way inside her, and defeated, at least temporarily, Chagdigiel. Of course, she remembers nothing of that, and all of that scarred her for life in many ways. But she is still, she is still in my heart. Magda is still, the true incarnate of Bina, with all the good and bad associated with that. Anyway, so she after the events of the backstory, where she spent time in this horrible orphanage and then lived through the siege of Leningrad, she went through a series of orphanages and camp and psychiatric institutions, and throughout her life in moving from Soviet to Germany, first East Germany and then West Germany, she has gone through a series of mental health, very serious mental health problems that will later be chronicled in this handout with excerpts from her journal that the players will see, and the player characters will see, and they will get a few glimpses into all of the events that have happened. Also, they will get some glimpses through their backstory, because depending on what options you choose for character creation, you will have known Magda at different times and during different eras. And it's one of the things I really love about the setup chapter, how it gives you sort of, if your character was in West Berlin in this time, they can know Magda in this way. And if you have a few characters with different relationships to Magda, you actually get a fair bit of her backstory that way that you can later piece together. Anyways, so Magda Orlova, when we meet her, she is in her 60s, and she is still described as this sort of vigorous and active and intellectually challenging person, which is I guess unfortunately a little bit hard to portray, because you get to portray Magda in a couple of scenes. Of course, you can use flashbacks. I did a bunch of Magda flashbacks with different characters to show her in different times of her life and so on. But anyway, if we look at the sort of key parts in her timeline, she ended up in West Berlin after making herself, I guess, politically uncomfortable in East Berlin. That's one of the lovely features about Magda. She is a strident person with a sort of strong passion for justice and truth and all that good stuff. She's an investigative journalist. She's a writer. She's also a seeker with a lot of occult interests, which is I have actually a little bit of a hard time piecing all of this, reconciling all these images, but we will get to that. So in Berlin, in East Berlin, back in the day, she was involved in founding, together with her friends Philip, Anton, and Sasha, the Slavic Association, which is this key organization. And she has then since sort of left, and she's been deported to West Germany, where she's been a writer and journalist. But very close to the start of the events of the scenario, half a year or so, she rejoins the Slavic Association and reconnects with Philip, Anton, and Sasha, these people she has had these on and off friendships and, in Philip's case, romantic relationship with throughout her life. And these relationships have been incredibly destructive in different ways. I guess let's just list some of them, right? So Philip Kramer, one of our big NPCs here, he killed Magda's husband, Lev Orlov, using the Dreamcurse, I guess, that we're going to meet later. Anton Mahler, another friend of Magda's, tried to have her assassinated in prison in 1972, after she had imprisoned for writing critical journalism about the East German politics. And now at the end here, all three of them, Sasha, Anton, and Philip, essentially, while under the influence of the incarnates that are in them, put a curse on Magda that will kill her and will also infect our player characters. And at the time we meet her, Magda has been living with this dream curse for some time, and she is becoming increasingly more and more sick and haunted by this. All right, so that's a bit of a recap, I guess. Can I just ask you sort of immediately, how did you feel about portraying Magda in these opening scenes where we actually get to meet her?
I mean, I think I just had a good reference because I was just using my family's side and my grandmother as a example, who was kind of very much the same embodiment of this woman who's a kind, nice, and somewhat fragile person, because like you have to understand that outwardly for everybody else, Magda seems maybe slightly ill or sick, but like she still has a lot of personality, but like um inwardly she is basically dying. Her body is deteriorating rapidly, and so you kind of have to consider that her movements are slower. Her kind of breathing is harder when she kind of even just takes a seat. Um, she's she's having trouble to think because there's various ideas and kind of things going through your head the whole time. So she sometimes maybe loses kind of a conscious thought, or stops in the middle of a sentence only to kind of continue it shortly after. It's yeah, it should be. I think still the main point in this whole environment, she tries to present herself in a public area that she knows well, at the gala for writers, for the what is it called? The Golden Plaque dinner for the German Authors Association. Um, and so she feels quite familiar in there, and she obviously has friends and colleagues around there that she wants to portray herself, because she's also Russian. She's been raised German, but like she has Russian heritage, and she's been kind of brought up by Dr. Tadlina as well. So like there's a pride in her that she doesn't want to seem weak. She doesn't want to appear kind of different. And so I think the moment when she kind of breaks in a bit, in my perspective, is when she kind of sits down and the players approach, or she approaches the players. The moment of realization, oh, I know a familiar face. I know a happy face because these are happy memories. But up to that point, she has this like, only if you look closely, you notice that she kind of holds herself on Philip, maybe, or she needs a stool to kind of keeps her steady. She is in her 60s, so that's a good start to kind of think about the character profile. But like, yeah, it's the underlying issue that she's a proud Russian woman, or Russian German woman, that tries to make appearances despite her condition, and she's used a lot of perfume to mask the, the scent that she thinks she's smelling. Um, and she is maybe even, excited to be here, and it's the last kind of huzzah that she knows she can maybe do. Um, so yeah, I think the entrance of Magda Orlova is is a it's almost unfortunate that you only have so little time with her in the opening scene. Um, but use that time in a sense wisely, because that portrayal of this woman and her connection to the players are kind of the important part. And as you said, Martin, flashbacks that can later kind of recount the players when they see her, and the players walk out of the gala dinner, and they think back like, oh wait, she was so much more agile, she was so fit, she went running or something back in the days. Um, that already kind of creates a bit of distress. And I think mainly you want to create emotional connection. The characters need to, despite the few scenes, need to immediately get attached and like, oh God, what happened to her? I need to catch up with you. Maybe another day, but like let's talk. I haven't seen you in so long, and you don't look so good. Can we talk another day? That is kind of how the players should end the meeting with Magda, in my perspective. But what is yours?
Yeah, and I guess it is sort of a little bit an open question. How do we go from the first step to the next step? Like that people actually, the characters will actually notice that Magda is disappearing, and they're actually sort of motivated to search for her. And in my case, that turned out very easy, and I imagine that's going to happen with a lot of player characters, i.e. they simply wanted to go to brunch with Magda and catch up. And of course then they're going to miss the brunch. Magda's going to miss the brunch. They're going to try to find her, and hopefully be motivated to do that without you having to like lead them by the nose with the aid of an NPC. Even though the book has the option of doing that, they have an NPC, Irian Adler, who I think seems to be introduced just as a way to have someone contact the player characters just in case they are themselves not able to figure out that Magda has gone mysteriously missing.
Although
I want to. Oh,
I
go ahead. Go ahead.
no, just Irene Adler was actually a connection of one of my players because he was a writer and she
Oh,
was his publicist. So she knew basically both the player and Magda, and that's why she contacted him in earnest, like, okay, we need this. But it was also the meeting was, well, it was the supposed publicist. It was the woman, the publicist that my player tried to impress in order to get his books published. Um, there were some things that went a bit wrong, maybe due to his addiction or his otherwise disadvantages that made the meeting slightly odd and concerning for Miss Adler. And so that again was kind of keeping a bit of track also for the player to kind of either get in contact with Adler or Adler gets back to them in order to just like reaffirm, like, were you okay? Did you get sick or something? But yeah, the connections of that scene are important. But maybe we should kind of pull back and explain maybe where we meet Magda. And we said that we meet her at the gold plaque dinner. And contrary to what a lot of the scenario will happen in Berlin, the gold plaque dinner is actually at the Rathaus in Hamburg, which is a beautiful location. And if you go on Google or any image search and you kind of look about pictures from the interior, there's so many beautiful kind of inspirational locations you could use to just expand a bit this introduction scene with a bit of sidetracking, maybe.
Yeah, I must say, I really like, if you're going to represent Germany, there are some other German locations as well. We're going to Frankfurt under order later and so on. But if you're going to sort of represent Germany in maybe a slightly stereotypical way, but you want to go for like a fancy place and a broken place. I mean, like I feel like starting in Hamburg with like this very, very fancy place, and there's like, as you say, these amazing um, images, print them for your gaming table, sort of like hand them out, sort of to give them a feel. And then you go after that very soon to Berlin, right after the fall of the wall, like 1 year after the fall of the wall, with like a real sort of wound going through it, both like physically and culturally. It's like it's a great location scouting from the authors, I think.
Indeed, indeed. But yeah, so the Golden Black Dinner is held in Hamburg, and we might have discussed this in the relationship and character build connection. It doesn't matter how exactly where your characters are located. They should, ideally for your help and purposes, should be either located in Hamburg or in Berlin, just to make the initial scene easier. Again, the expectation to the players should also be that they are willing to travel and they need to be kind of able to leave the house for this scenario. So just be aware of that. Um, but if you place them in either location, it is usually not a big issue to kind of connect them. The book gives a couple of examples of how to incorporate them. They can be additional security personnel, they can be waitresses, they can be dealing at the reception, or were hired by the awards ceremony. They can be authors themselves, or they can be whatever they want. However, it is more rewarding, I would say, on my end, if the players have the autonomy of being guests and they can be accompanied guests. So consider, for example, a nanny or nurse who's accompanying a family and takes care of the children while they're at the evening when daddy has this big speech. They are asked to kind of be security personnel that mingles within the crowd. Or they just have had some sort of connection. I'm still on the fence about how I introduced one of my characters initially, but it was because they had such a strong relationship to Magda Orlova. I pretty much had Magda send her a invitation card, and it was kind of her hope that she would come because she knew that she was in the area, and she hoped that her address didn't change. And it's been so long, and it's coming from the side of Magda's interior devolvement and her destruction, interior kind of collapse, that she's kind of recalling events and past encounters that she kind of like, oh, well, maybe I can get them on as my +1 or something. If you're completely out of loss. Again, that's just something where I'm on the fence, but it worked out narratively very neat and very nice, because the character was I think a cashier for a supermarket, so she was like very uncomfortable and put her in a position of like gala dinners with like dresses, and she was like just her kind of role play in that scene was already kind of like such a beautiful contrast to the scene. That was kind of rewarding for everybody at the table almost.
Like sort of like great Cinderella-esque setup. I like
Exactly.
that.
And even Cinderella gets a treat afterwards.
Yeah, and in my case, it was sort of we ended up with like having two people who went to the banquet as guests and two security people, and that
Perfect, yeah.
actually worked out pretty well. A security person can be suspicious of certain guests and can sort of find drugs on the toilet and be tempted with their drug addict disadvantage, and
Ooh,
see
I
a
like that.
strange glimmering on the roof of the opposite house, and so on. So that works. And I think this is a reasonable, flexible setup that should work for most groups. I do find it amusing in the book that it says if you absolutely can't get the characters to the gala, like, let them meet Magda at like an illegal gambling club or something, which I find hilarious.
Sure. Yeah. My recommendation also would be not to resort to that solution because it's not ideal.
It would
Um,
be a funny alternative just if you wanted to open the campaign in a weird way, I guess.
that is true. The characters technically meet for the first time as well, unless they know each other. So the gala starts at 8, and Magda's entrance is actually only after midnight. So you have 4 hours of uh, role playing other characters at the table, the gala events if you want to, or create a little kind of like je ne sais quoi flair to the scene that kind of maybe incites them to kind of stick together to find each other out. Is there something unique about them? Why do they see each other across the room amongst all those people? But like there's something about the other person. Um, it doesn't have to be emotional, sexual in that way, but like just this uncanny valley type of thing, and let them kind of figure it out. I think that's. I mean, yeah. But how was your the bringing together of the characters at the table? Did you all put them at the same table? You said you have two guests and two security. So, did they all meet finally, or were they separate events up to?
Yeah, so the two security people, I mean, interacted a lot, of course, because they were working together, and the two guests ended up sort of spotting each other in the crowd, and they had a bit of a. They were not like very tight before, but at least they were aware of each other. So we had some sort of character relations, but they were relatively weak. But they did end up, and this was purely player initiative, being a bit connected because one of them was there with his publisher, which wasn't Frau Adler, but another NPC that the player had put together, and the other guest, the book dealer, ended up hitting on the publisher and trying to actually successfully in the end convinced her to accompany him to his hotel room at the end of the night. So they had a bit of like weird tenseness about like, dude, why are you flirting with my publisher? Which was entertaining.
Fantastic. Yeah. That's a good combination. And then, um, I presume at midnight, it says after the unknown poet Leo Schütz, who nobody gives a damn about afterwards. Um,
Lovely detail.
exactly. But we all know that Leon Schütz won. It is the fact that after midnight, when there's after party, people get drunk, which is also a nice scene to kind of create a bit of that culty vibe. You have this like alcohol and drugs infused kind of atmosphere, loud music. It's warm. It it creates a very nice setting, and then you see Magda Orlova enter, but not alone, but with her three friends. And they're starting to mingle a bit. And as I said earlier in my portrayal of her, she tries to be proud, she tries to be kind of presentable, but at the same time, she is frail. Now, the reason why she's frail is because she's cursed. That is maybe one point that we should talk about because it comes in at the end of this chapter. The curse itself. Martin,
Yes.
let's just start. What does the curse do, and why is it so dangerous?
Yes, the curse. It's interesting, right? The curse is described later in some excerpts from some medical/occult literature. A beautiful multidisciplinary research field, I guess, as being both. It comes from the dream, but it acts sort of on the body and on the mind simultaneously. And it is a parasite, but it also has all these all these knock-on surreal effects in addition to affecting the body. So you start out kind of like when you get a flu. You have this first immediate reaction when you get infected. The body mounts an immune response, and you get high fever, you get hallucinations, you get very, very ill, you feel ruddy, and then you get better. And while you feel better, the parasite is inside you, and it's replicating and eating its way, and so on. And then eventually it starts to express in the form of itching and these like little boils and rashes that then grow eventually into pustules. And then at the end, you have these disgusting worms that are eating the body, essentially. Now, while this is happening, you have awful nightmares that just keep intensifying. They start out with being in the darkness, being in the basement or something in the corner that you can't really see. Then eventually the thing in the corner comes closer, becomes bigger, more vicious. You start to feel that it really likes to hurt you, and it has hurt you before. You just don't remember, and it really wants to hurt you. Then you get these awful pains and so on. And I mean, that's why Magda is doing so poorly. She doesn't sleep because of these nightmares, and she is constantly sort of in a state of anxiety because of all these sort of bad dreams that are permeating into her mind. Now, to make matters worse or add insult to injury, unless you have the knowledge or the enhanced awareness, you're infected yourself, or you are sensitive to these types of supernatural matters. Of course, no one else sees the boils and the rashes, and they don't feel that smell that you feel, and so on. So Magda, as we learn from her calendar and from her diary, is perceived as a hypochondriac by this half dozen different doctors and alternative medicine purveyors and chiropractors, or everyone that she's talked to. They all believe that she is imagining things, or that she has some sort of psychosomatic issue or whatever, while in fact she is right. She is being eaten from the inside, but no one else sees that. So that is the parasite and the Dreamcurse, and it's has been put on her, well, consciously, I guess. She has been cursed. That's how it starts, by her friends, unfortunately. Her friends don't really know that they have done this, or at least parts of them might know. They are conflicted about it, I guess, because of these incarnates of Shagidiel that are in them. And actually, that is something we can talk about, I guess. How much do we think that Philip Kramer, Anton Mahler, and Alexander Pogodin actually know that they are killing their friend?
That's a good question. I think we briefly talked about what an incarnate defined by cult rules is before, but from the meta perspective of that character, I think, yeah, multiple personality disorder or something like this, dissociative identity disorder, as it's called nowadays, I suppose, is the more fitting term, I guess, that I would apply for the three. Because on the one hand, you have their lives being still affected from what they went through. They are dealing with trauma and whatever they kind of keep their lives with. So we have an occultist who, does all kinds of weird stuff. We have a man who's supporting the right-wing fascist agenda, and somebody else who's just getting rich on other people as well. So I don't know if maybe these items also weigh somewhat on your conscience at some point, but there is clearly, for me, the suppressed feeling that there must be some part of them that kind of knows that something is wrong, but they're clearly not aware of what it is. Because otherwise, the premise that they are incentivizing the characters through the curse that they're now passing through to Magda, which she then passes to them, wouldn't make sense, right? The idea of the curse is that it will kill Magda, but Magda kills infects the players, so they have the same curse. And so now the players will feel connected to Magna and want to avenge her in order to kind of deal with that curse, thus killing the three who cursed her, which is exactly what Gilly wants.
Yeah.
The question, though, that I'm having, because it might come in again at the end of this chapter, is if they are not consciously aware of this, or if they even are consciously aware of this, where would they do this? My guess would most likely be at Pogodon's mansion, undisturbed, away from weary eyes. As I'm imagining that even this ritual might take not only a few minutes, but like a couple of hours to perform. So if they do it at Pogodon's mansion, would there be others that maybe witnessed that in the past? Would there be sex workers or attendees, servants, or whatever that are then disappearing after that? Who knows? Ultimately, this is just like an idea that I'm starting to boil together for a second run, where I want to give the players the option to kind of later on have the ability to learn more about this curse if they choose the investigative storyline more. So, like, investigate, find out where Pogodon lives, and then talk to the people maybe in the past employ. Could they tell them something like, oh yeah, about like last year in February or something, there were 5 people there. They came in black cars, they stayed all night, and then explain the curse. I think the understanding and the mechanism of the curse on that front is a bit vague. And maybe for good and bad reasons, but like I would have hoped to get more insight of actually the mechanisms and the cause and causality of the curse in its transfer. Um,
Yeah, I agree. I would have loved if, because we get Philip Kramer's book later, right, with the counter
exactly.
curse. And yes, the counter curse ritual has been adulterated by Chegidiel as part of the plot, etc., etc. So it is a trick in a way. But I would have loved it if there was a description of the actual ritual to do the curse in the same book, so that the player characters could see what had been done to them, and if that was really unpleasant and involved this huge rigmarole in the temple with a sacrifice or something. I would love that. And if I had sort of thought about it a bit earlier, I would have written it as a handout for that part of the chapter. Now I didn't, but that would have been so cool. That could have been really nasty.
As you just say that, that could actually be also a good incentive for adding elements of like, well, they need an altar for that ritual. They need a private location. So you can give indications of basically Pogonon's mention without mentioning them. And if they find this and they kind of look at this, oh yeah, Pogonon's mention, check, 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 check. Okay, okay. Um, they can put one on one together and really confirm kind of their suspicion much more clearly. Because otherwise, everything else is pretty vague, I believe.
Yes.
Um, there's not a precise idea of how anything works after this. And the other thing is then also the transmission of the curse, right? So we just explained kind of roughly the methodology and the curse itself, but like the core part in that unexpected meeting is that as soon as Magda and the three incarnates are coming to the gala, they approach or are approached by the players, and Magda will then make some sort of physical contact. She will take off her gloves. She will give give them a kiss on the cheeks or something in order to transfer the curse. Now, if I would be considerate and thinking about if she, if Magda would be a woman who kisses the women on the face or good acquaintances, she would have kissed multiple people on that gala dinner already. How does the curse affect NPCs in the sense? What happens to players that are affected by it who don't, who are not aware? Are they dying like Lev Orlov and they just disappear in the newspaper? Oh my God, could that be used later on, several weeks later, in a handout where there's a list of people who appear in newspaper who have died under horrific circumstances that players find and realize like, oh, they were all at the gala.
Like, I mean, and I agree. There's a possible inconsistency here, right? Because later, of course, Dr. Richter, who we meet a little bit later, of course, the good pathologist doesn't know everything. In fact, he doesn't know that much at all. He is just echoing what he's read in a couple of books and speculating, but he seems very convinced that the curse or the disease is not transmissible at all unless you have this specific immunodeficiency or some, science mumbo jumbo like that. And to me, that is science mumbo jumbo. I think he doesn't really know what he's talking about. He's just, trying to make sense of what's going on. But my take on this, and there could be possible other takes, my takes is that the parasite doesn't actually, isn't actually contagious by contact in that way. So my sort of head canon here is that what happened, this transmission event is like part of a Chagidial plot, and it's sort of very, very specifically targeting these people. And actually, I made a point of having Magda not take off her gloves, because I wanted to have this sort of like feeling that, she's happy to see them and she hugs them. Everyone went in spontaneously for a hug when they met her, right? But she like kind of tries to keep her distance a little bit, and she keeps her gloves on because to her, I mean, she is hideous. She has boils all over her, right? And she's covered herself, drenched herself in perfume to hide the stench. So I thought that was, in a way, a more powerful image than having Magda for some reason take off her gloves, sort of. Of course, that would be what you would normally expect her to do, probably, because it seems a little bit weird and impolite to have these like big gloves on you when you're, greeting everyone and so on. But yeah, so that was my take on it. I'm sort of imagining that the bodily contagion is actually not really sort of a feature of the curse.
Mhm.
That's I don't know. I don't know
No,
what's
that
correct.
sounds. I actually, now that I heard your version, I I do like it more because yeah, it wouldn't make sense for her to take gloves off if she thinks that she's covered in boils. It just narratively doesn't work with me. So like I think yeah, doing this as a magical kind of focal point is I think the better option here.
I think it in a way maybe it is a little bit inelegant to have it's all part of Chagiliel's plan, but it is all part of Chagiliel's plan, I think, because at the same time Chagiliel
Yeah.
is like implanting these horrible nightmares in Philip, Anton, and Sasha to make them sort of drive them and the player characters against each other. So it is sort of, I think it might fit. Uh,
Yep. No, that's a good point. I actually will take over that idea. Um, and yeah, so in those first conversations, once they've greeted and Magda kind of recognizes them or recounts old friendships, um, the players will be made aware of her condition. They will realize how she's kind of deteriorated despite her kind of portrayal. Um, as far as I remember, she mentions that she has nightmares, but she doesn't say what type of nightmares they are.
There is a quote if you press her on the content of the nightmares in the chapter, if I recall correctly. That didn't come up in our case, but she says a
Ah,
few
right.
things that you can then recognize once you start seeing the nightmares yourself, I think. Um,
Yep. Okay. Yeah,
but
it's still kept very vague though.
yeah, and I feel like in the way it flowed naturally for us, yeah, that didn't really come up. Like, yeah.
I think it's also something else to go dig deeper into these nightmares when, on the other hand, you have these three incarnates standing close by and backing off further and further with sheer terror in their expression. Because, as we might know by now, the three incarnates had nightmares themselves, and they had nightmares of the player characters killing them in the most gruesome and horrific ways. And so, as they are backing off, seeing their future enemy basically getting in contact with them the first time, yeah, they quickly kind of retreat. How did you play this out, Martin?
Now let's see if I remember. I had them. So I had them first, kind of as it's described in the book, sort of show up and make horrified faces at the guests once they see them at the table, and then the guests got talking to Magda. But because that was only 2 out of 4 player characters, I also had them bump into security on their way out and be, a bit suspicious. And I think in the end, was even one of them sort of mouthing "you" at someone when they sort of retreat from them and quickly make themselves scarce. So sort of trying to like drive home the point that these three folks are really afraid of the player characters specifically and personally. But I didn't do so much about it. Like no one had like a conversation with them or anything like that.
Did they inquire about them from Magda?
Uh, Actually, no.
Ooh.
But the guests did not. Maybe because I didn't play. I mean, Magda was standing and talking to them, or like arriving with them and talking with them for a while. But one of them did recognize Philip, however, because he had been together with Magda. He had a relationship with Magda actually back in the day, and he knows Philip from back then. If I recall correctly, he actually does remember the other two as well, or he's met them, but it's really only Philip that he sort of, had any real any real interactions with. And then the security people, of course, immediately got the names off of the guest list because they're that kind of players.
Of course, why wouldn't you? I mean,
yeah. I mean, they were being suspicious, so of course we got to look into them. Which I mean, is great because there are so many names in this scenario, and it took us a while for everyone to learn Godin, Mahler, and Kramer. So Kramer. So we had to get started early.
after they meet Magda and they have a brief conversation, a short scene where they understand her demise and her kind of like nightmares that plague them or not. Um, at some point, she will become unsteady and kind of excuse herself. I had Philip Kramer almost like insisting to her to leave because he kind of came to her and like I gave the players almost like the his kind of glare as he looks at them at the table. You fuckers, I will kill you if I could. We should go, my darling. You're up too late, and we should get up and just give them that kind of like this weird behavior of Philip as he then gets mugged up and kind of not carries, but like supports her out of the gala. And that's the moment when also I think Magda also offered that they should get back together for brunch or some dinner the other day. And she hopes to hear from them. And she just gave them, I think, her phone number here in Hamburg. Yeah, and said that they should meet tomorrow. I think the next day for like brunch as well. Um, and then Magda and the incarnates leave. They leave the players a bit confused, befuddled, and not really clear what this whole character generation with Magda's backstory was so important about for these two scenes. But as the scenario says, the deadly game has begun. What comes next, Martin?
Well, two things. High fever and feeling very bad for depending on how literal you want to be with the text, I guess, of all from like a day to like a week, kind of, or like a few days. But also there is another little James Bond-esque little detail that you can put in there, or is discussed in the chapter, which is the first appearance of the henchman and of the Alexei Blobel. Blobel, I guess, is probably how you should emphasize that, right? Anyway,
I called it Blobel. Yeah.
Blobel. It sounds better. A bunch of well, he is working for Sasha, Philip, and Anton, I guess, mostly for Sasha, I guess. And he is going to be bothering the player characters for all of chapter 1 and maybe further on. By looking into them, sabotaging them, shooting at them, and spying on them. And he starts out, well, he is not there personally, but his employee starts out by watching them from a rooftop. And this can, of course, be completely ignored, or it can be hinted at a little bit as something creepy. You see something moving on the roof. Or if you want to be a little bit ham-fisted, like yours truly, you can allow this person to sit on the roof of the opposite building, looking with night vision goggles and taking photos with a camera. And then you can have a player character who's a security person and a hothead who starts investigating and even gets hold of his camera, if you want to. Well, and if the dice wants. So this is, I guess, this is interesting. We talked about this a little bit earlier. The timeline here probably doesn't really add up. It's like, why is this person on a rooftop observing the characters already, of like just maybe just hours after the Russians saw the player characters at the gala and got spooked? Well, book doesn't really explain. It explains later that the investigation will start after the three incarnates order it. But in my case, I imagine that this would be connected to the dark secret and backstory of one of the characters. So actually, for us, the person there taking photos in the night was not actually. Well, it works with these the incarnates, and it's going to be a sort of a little bit of a spooky coincidence that it's they have multiple reasons to be aware of this guy, but he was actually there to spy on one of the player characters who has a dark secret of connections to the Stasi, where there is already a price on his head, essentially.
Good old stalker.
Yes. Did you use this encounter at all, or did you save Blobel's guys for later?
I left Babel there, and I did, because one of my players also was a ex-Stasi officer. She understood that they are being surveilled, or at least they are under surveillance as they left. Now, luckily, they've never really questioned that involvement. Narratively, I would explain it only in a sense that Alexei probably drove the four of them to the event as they are concerned about, that they're having nightmares that somebody wants to kill them. So they have their main honcho, their henchman Alexei, with them at all times. And so he waits in the car while they go to the gala party. And once they're done, they come back out, and all of them inform them they're here, describe the characters. He then quickly grabs his stuff from the boot of the trunk, goes over to the other house, and watches them. That's the only way that I could narratively kind of like consider that this makes sense. And this is the first touch up. It's kind of like I'm just gonna see who you are, where you go, and maybe who you together with. Do you have a car? What license plate? And stuff like that. And then once the characters are gone, I'm pretty sure that unless they kind of confront him, which in my case they didn't, he would just go over to the gala event again and then steal a copy of the guest list and have the names basically ready. Or get them through Magda even, through the three Russians. And yeah, and that's when he starts to, interfere with their lives. So they go through the character's mail. Bank statements are requested. I think their medical files are requested from the local hospitals or insurance providers, under all kinds of false names and PO boxes, and only made to the character's alertness because they want to confirm that they requested and authorized their request for this, because after all, we're still in Germany. Nothing would just easily be sent. And yeah, the other thing is also, if characters had previous police references, that might come in interesting because maybe Alexei starts to utilize old enemies of the characters in order to just deal with them. Why should he dirty his hands if he knows that there's a rocker group or something behind one of the characters? Well, just tell them where they are, send photos, and have them deal with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and in a way, this is a very straightforward sort of GM move kind of action list. And it's interspersed throughout the chapter in different ways. But you can imagine, or I imagine this as sort of like a bullet point list of like ramping up the menace and sort of causing problems. So it's like, and eventually there is the option that Lobel sends, once they start getting really close to the Russians, they order Blobel to like kill the player characters, and a bunch of people with, a bunch of NPCs with guns walk into the scene.
My next comment might be disputable, but I would say that I wouldn't disconcern the idea that maybe he also utilizes fascists and neo-Nazis in his attempt.
Yeah.
Which then can already be a bridge to chapter 4 later on, the Germanische Gemeinschaft, the German Autumn. Because it might be just easier if the players or the characters have political ambitions or views or other things that can be I don't want to say used, but like abused by fascists. That would be a great idea to just bring in that narrative early on, and it doesn't need to be connected, because those who the fascists and Nazis who are being called to them, they're not really understanding why they're being called. They're just like, beat this guy up. Okay, happy to do so. Like, cool. But it sets a good premise for easier integration of the later chapters. Because I think throughout the whole thing, one thing that I've learned is you can, and if you want to, connect a lot of things very early on in subtle ways that it makes it easier for the transition of the players later on to actually find this. Because otherwise it sometimes feels like a chapter ends and then comes the Nazis. Here come the Nazis, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it makes perfect sense. We learn later in the Slavic Association that they are dealing with Germanische Gemeinschaft. They are like paying them for, well, for secure, for violence essentially, or like by their,
Exactly.
So it makes perfect sense that, if you have a bunch of violent thugs, well, there you have them, and
Exactly.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And they can be even just in the background. They can be observers too, instead of Alexei Blobel, who, due to his, I think, physical appearance, stands out a bit in the crowd. A group of Nazis in either Hamburg or less in well, more in Hamburg, but less in Berlin, and they would blend in with the environment, and they don't have to be like full out fascist neo-Nazis. They can be kind of the subtle clue, and they can be just standing at the corner, a group of people just watching the players,
Hmm?
reporting back to Bobel. And if they confront them, they notice they have, SS tattoos or whatever, or GG tattoos or whatever it is that you want to indicate that these are definitely not of the right sort of people. Um, that might be also a good time if they call the police to kind of look into those characters that are observing them. The police might be, well, they did nothing wrong. They're good German citizens. Just kind of create a bit more tension through like passive, um, passive not doingness. So the police is partially under the pockets of the Slavic and the Germanische Gemeinschaft, so they're pretty happy with how things are running especially in Berlin. In Hamburg, you're not gonna stay too long anyway, so like you don't have to stress it at that point. But definitely in Berlin, I would say it's a great way to kind of introduce these elements at that point already, and then kind of re-bring them up. Um, why
Yeah,
not?
yeah, because
Yeah, go ahead.
no, I mean we're all always looking for ways, I think, or should be looking for ways to like foreshadow the later chapters to try to like really integrate this um,
But
into a
yeah,
whole.
I mean, why is that important? What I said not too long in Hamburg, because what happens the next day is, well, the players arrange a meeting with Magda, or they kind of try to get her for brunch, and she doesn't show.
Hmm? Yeah. So here we have some relatively straightforward. It becomes a bit more complicated later, but here we have some relatively straightforward in investigation, and I think maybe here, you know, I might complain sometimes that authors of scenarios sort of, in campaigns, that we assume player character behavior a little too much. But here I think it is pretty fair to assume that we're very soon going to investigate Magda's apartment, right? Especially if Magda even gave like her phone number, and when you call, of course, she doesn't answer. And indeed, that's what happened here after some time of being ill, some time of having surreal dreams, because I couldn't resist the option to have the dreams foreshadow later chapters and tell us a little bit of disjointed backstory about the siege of Leningrad and whatnot. The players feeling sick like dogs. Well, the player character is feeling sick like dogs. The players dragged their characters to a cafe. I had a cute little printout of a cafe in Hamburg, and then they sat there and felt really bad while Magda did not show. And after a while, they went to Magda's Hamburg apartment, or they spent some time trying to find it, but eventually they make it there, and they spend some time sweet talking neighbors to actually let them in and convince them that they are what they actually are, i.e. the concerned friends of Magda. And by that time, when you make it into this apartment, and this is like really the first location where you get what's very typical of how the rest of the book is going to be laid out. You get these the location with the maps and the numbered rooms and all these descriptions, and you come into a place where you realize that things are very, very wrong with your old friend. And of course, Magda is not there. And I think that works quite well. And there are probably little things that you can tweak about how the apartment is, and
Yeah.
but I really quite like this bit, actually. And I actually also quite like that you start out with having like Magda's apartment in Hamburg, and then you realize that she's gone back to Berlin, so you have to go look in her apartment in Berlin, where she's not living anymore, but she has been living there recently, and she's kept both the places. And then when you get there, things are like even worse in a way, and that's where you eventually find Magda in a really bad state. I really like that, the way it works, and how you feel a bit of dread, I think, already in the first apartment. And, you know, anyone who has any genre knowledge will, I guess, suspect that they're going to find Magda in a pretty bad way before they find her. So, yeah.
Yeah. That's all good point. And I guess from the disappearance, if players don't investigate her because her name is in the phone book, as far as I remember. Players can also, or GMs can also utilize the idea of her publisher, Irene Adler, the woman, to call them and give her uncertainty about Magda's position. She can tell them also that, you know, obviously she lives now in Hamburg because she left Berlin a couple of weeks ago. She said something about doctors, maybe, like, just add this kind of touch that she was concerned. And yeah, this should be definitely straightforward. Don't put any hindrances here, because the point of finding Magda's apartment in Hamburg is, again, the opening to the whole kind of adventure, I think, because that's when they learn the first time there's something really wrong with a lot of things. What is the most memorable thing from Magda's apartment in Hamburg that you would say for yourself is important?
So I think, if I recall correctly, when we were in Hamburg, that's where there was a nosy neighbor all the time, kind of looking a little bit suspiciously at the player characters. So they couldn't like root around as much as they wanted. But this is also where you get the postcard, right? That's in Hamburg.
That's where the postcard was sent.
And it's also where you get, because I mean, that makes sense, that's where Magda is living. That's also where you get the answering machine message from Philip.
Exactly.
And I enjoyed both of these quite a lot. Because the postcard is there sort of stuck in a bunch of other mail that isn't really so interesting. Of course, when you have a neighbor looking on, you can't like start opening Magda's mail, but you can kind of sneak this postcard, or you can try at least. And one of the characters did that. And the postcard is just weird, right? In a way, maybe that's the surreal dreams are, or the dreams are weird. The Dreamcurse is weird, but maybe that's like the real sort of what is this moment, right? When Magda has gotten this very terse postcard from Piotr, written in Russian, and I spent way too much time online trying to find a period-appropriate postcard with images of Frankfurt under order, so that there would be like no doubt about where the postcard came from, and also to get that image in there. And that landed because the characters immediately became very suspicious about this postcard, and I mean, one of them literally tried to use enhanced awareness on it later to get like a vision of if there's anything magical about this postcard, which of course there is, because it's written by Piotr, the dream magician. But yes, so that was like my favorite part. That, and I guess someone before the neighbor is protesting, sort of hitting the play button on the answering machine, and you know, Philip screaming about the nightmares and so on.
So that's a good point. Yeah, I definitely also like the answering machine, and the postcard. My players especially found interesting the diaries that she's written in her Hamburg apartment. Now, maybe take it from my experience. If you introduce the diaries and players say they are gonna grab all they can carry, um, be prepared to kind of at least give them something once in a while to either Magda's emotional state, a foreshadowing um, kind of thing. It could be also something cryptic that she encounters visions or circumstances or events of things that actually transpires later in the campaign. But yeah, they go back to 62. So there's a whole range of diaries to cover, and those that are missing, I believe, are in her Berlin apartment, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
But
yes. The
yeah,
last,
so
the latest one is there, I think. The earlier missing ones, I think, are just missing, but like the one she's actually
yeah.
writing, that's in Berlin.
I mean, those that are missing are also the time periods that she either was imprisoned or in psychiatric care
Yes, yes.
or traveling or whatever. But yeah, um, so just be aware to think about if you want to introduce the diaries, just make yourself prepared to kind of what is it that you want the players to get from those diaries. Because ultimately, if they find them and they're starting to go through them and they take them with them, I had one player be consistent. Every spare time we're not doing something, I will read the diaries until I've read every single one. So think about what it is that you want to tell with the story. And it shouldn't be it should be at least some reward for them. It shouldn't be just a waste of time because there's so many nice ideas that you can incorporate here to kind of give the player some flavor. Um, I guess the calendar actually is also a revelation in itself because there's a Rolodex or calendar where Magda has kind of put up several appointments with names that turn out to be physicians or medical doctors. So she has clearly used this kind of avenue as well to kind of explore her disease because she cannot figure it out. And also the if you consider the bathroom and or the I think is it bathroom or yeah, the bathroom is containing a lot of drugs and medication for sickness. I would because it's her current period, so it's kind of like an over description of things. So like, you know, it's a lot of medical stuff at the moment. Um, that can be very intimidating and just use it in a right way of like, well, this amount of drugs would have either killed or like at least caused other issues with a human being if they would have taken all that stuff together at the same time. Um, yeah,
Yeah, and that was also, I think, in my case, like some of the characters, like first thought, like, wow, so many empty medicine bottles. Is there, has she tried to harm herself? That kind of thing.
yeah,
And of course, that isn't the case in this case. It's just that she has been prescribed a lot of different things by doctors who think that her issues are, you know, psychiatric in nature, and I guess are not very responsible. Or
yeah.
maybe she has bought some of it on the sort of like black market, I guess, or like sort of illegally. I don't know. Yeah. Is there anything else in the Hamburg apartment that is interesting?
I
Oh
guess
yeah,
there
she's been
are
packing, right? And there are the very clear signs that she's left from Berlin, right? There's like the
that she's
timetable
either
for yeah.
came from or going to Berlin. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Um, which in my case, I think I just kept the place reinterpreted this differently. Um, and I think so how I did it because um so before I go into that actually I want to mention two more things about the apartment itself, and then we go into the timeline and timetables. So, two things that I found interesting kind of aspects of like shattering reality and cult vibes. Remember, don't try to kind of overpopulate the scenario with like culty vibes. But if so far nothing really has happened or the opportunity didn't arise, the apartment itself is the first fun playground to play with. Um, One of the things that I kind of liked and I've prepped now is in the kitchen, a mouse disappears into the shadows as some character comes in, and maybe it runs just behind the refrigerator or something, and then you just hear like a crushing noise or something. And when you pull out the the fridge a bit, and you see there's a tear in the wallpaper, or like the wallpaper slightly lifts off from the wall. If they really kind of move in there and look behind, they see that there's not a wall, but like a crevice almost, a dark, disembodied emptiness that stretches. And maybe at that point, another character comes in, or there's a sound in the apartment, and suddenly they turn, they look again, and there's a wall. It's just the remnants of Chigdigil's presence through Magda in this apartment have infested it, have kind of brought these cracks into reality. And it is also not a clue that would be just found. It's something that players need to be invested. Like, oh, I don't care what the mouse went to. They need to actively move stuff. They need to make noise. They need to kind of investigate. So it's a reward for kind of shattering the reality for the players. And the other one, as we mentioned earlier, the postcard from Piotr is quite important. So if the characters have not gone through the mail or did not care because it's private, while they're in the apartment, all of a sudden they hear the letterbox flapping open and the postcard comes in. If they run outside, look around, there's nobody there. And then they have Piotr's postcard. So these are just two elements that I liked for that place.
Yeah, I really like the latter one. A, because, like you said, it is kind of important to initiate Piotr at some point, so that can lead to chapter 3, the dark dreams, and also lead them to chapter 2, I guess, to the Frankfurt clinic.
Exactly.
So and also Piotr, who we will meet later. I mean, he is one of the children who
a tortured soul.
Yes,
who escaped into the dreams.
Yes, exactly, and he's acting from the future as a powerful dream magician, which is one of these lovely culty elements that I really like. And the book says not to begin chapter 3 until they have sort of been to the Frankfurt clinic and certain events have happened there. But of course, if you want to do it some other way, like of course I wanted to, I justify myself by thinking that Piotr, I mean, is again a powerful dream magician working from the future here. So I guess he can find. I'm imagining that he can find the player characters, sort of regardless of whether they have been to the clinic or not. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. So Hamburg apartment. I guess not everyone's going to rush immediately to Berlin to try to find Magda there, but the scenario certainly expects the player characters to do, or at least the way it's written.
That is true. And so that brings me back to the timetable thing. So, as I said, my players not really have had either the logistics or the cohesiveness to put together that she might have left for Berlin, but that rather that she came from Berlin. And I think it was more spontaneous at that moment that I said, oh, well, how about that? And they then went outside to question the neighbors, like, has anyone seen Magda leave or whatever? And that's when I kind of begin to think about the timeline of also the movements of our three incarnates, because after the meeting at the gala, it is the 14th or 15th of September. It's probably 1:30 the latest by the time the incarnates and Magda leave. The characters probably stay another hour, maybe, not too long as everything winds down. Also to see Blobel. So, what do the characters, or what do the antagonists and the NPCs do? My interpretation was the three of them drive Magda back to her apartment in Hamburg. Then the three incarnates drive to their hotel because they're all originally from Berlin. They're basically here just to help Magda and be with her because they're in some way or another kind of, I don't want to say responsible, but like um are connected to her. I think that's the best word I can use right now. And I think the answering machine messages obviously are from a couple of days. However, the last one, which is it's Philip. You've got to call me soon. Soon it will be too late. His voice is panicked. He's kind of terrified. This one could be from that night. So assuming that the characters are coming in the next day and they have called afterwards, then their message will appear after that. But this message would be around maybe 3 a.m. or something. And I envision Philip having nightmares at the hotel. He couldn't sleep. He got panicked and he understood that characters are in this town. He needs to leave. He has to get distance to them to kind of do something against them, to consolidate his powers, his arcane knowledge. So he rushes over to pick up Magda, tells the others to kind of either stay or leave. They don't really matter, but like he drives Magda at night, in the middle of the night, back to Berlin. Mainly to be just closer to his library, but secondly, since the relationship between Magda and Philip has reestablished, the two of them kind of have then a connection. There is something that connects them that also makes it clear that Philip is in a connection and is responsible for Magda's death. At least that's what the players will think later on. Um, and yeah, so the two of them, or three, however many additional characters are in the car, will drive to Berlin. Maybe it's even Alexei Blobel to organize the observation. Um, and so that's what the players found out that, oh yeah, there was a quite a ruckus. It was like 3, 4 in the morning. I was banging and people were kind of moving about and there was yelling and yeah, I saw Magda leave and I mean, she said she was fine. I didn't need to call the police. It was just a party, and she apologized. And then I saw them leave. They drove off, and that's the last I saw from her. And that way, you also can add the element of connection between Magda and the incarnate in a narrative style to the players because everything else was so far like metagaming for the GM, but like this is the first time that you could introduce an element of, oh, they are seriously connected. Philip comes at 3, 4 in the morning to pick up Magda to bring her to Berlin. Why would he do that? You wouldn't do that normally. Like there must be something more. So like there's a connection between them. I think that was the main takeaway for me from her Hamburg apartment. And I suppose the kitchen also has the uh, sets of keys for the various places in Berlin and her garage and why not, um, as well as her car. Um, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, right. That reminds me that I had a beautiful kind of creepy scene as well in the parking lot because I wanted to see Magda's car in the basement. Um, and they saw something moving in the shadows of the basement, the lights flickering, there was not enough illumination. and then just like a football kind of rolled down from the entryway. There was no kids, but like there was like almost like a maniacal laughter coming from all around them and then stopped immediately. Um, and yeah, they went through the car and they found, I think, even versions and editions of the Slavic Association magazine. Those ones that the players don't find in Berlin because she took them. And that way they can already learn about the Slavic Association, the connections, and so forth while they travel to Berlin in order to prep them. Oh, gosh. Yeah, that. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so 40 sessions later, things comes a bit slow to memories. But there it is. Yeah, that was a key thing as well. Uh, the Opel Vectra in the parking lot. Creepy scene in the basement. Perfect time for Nachtkäfer or whatever you want to add there. Um, and yeah, have pretty much the missing links, or at least an idea of her um, connection to the Slavic Association known if the players have not discovered it yet. Sorry, now I'm
Yeah,
done.
yeah, because otherwise, that is most clearly communicated in the diary excerpts, I guess, and those are um, the ones that the campaign book gives us. They are actually in the last diary, so they wouldn't get those until Berlin, actually. Um, yeah, so that makes sense to see that a bit earlier. Yeah, I think.
Yeah. And so I think after that, the players already knew they need to travel to Berlin and they need to kind of um, leave whoever lived in Hamburg, their things behind, and travel there to kind of figure out things, what was going on. Because also, don't forget, leave time for the characters. Like the investigation at Magda's apartment in Hamburg should take at least the other evening or something. Like it should be too late for them to start traveling. They need some rest and they don't feel great, so they need to go home. Also, the disease progresses, so like, take that with them. The next morning they feel even worse. They're throwing up, they feel discombobulated. And now they need to travel for 5 hours to Berlin. How they get there, I mean, they can take train, they can take buses, and they can take a car if they have some. Um, and yeah, any other last comments on Hamburg?
No, just that, like you said there, I guess we also want them in a way. I think we want them to dream. Like I've come in all of really all dream heavy cult scenarios, but certainly the Black Madonna, I've come to settle into this sort of rhythm that I really like. That's sort of, during the day, kind of, there's investigation happening and there are creepy things and action scenes, and then there's a night, and we haven't had like every night. It's not, you fall to sleep, you wake up. It's like, no, everyone's gonna have nightmares, and the core character that has the nightmare disadvantage is gonna have particularly bad nightmares. And then once the characters start, once we start chapter 3 and the Wanderer's dreams with Piotr, the dream magician, start showing up, characters are going to have these dream experiences. So the night is really a whole separate event in the Black Madonna, and that's another reason, I guess, to try to slow things down a little bit so that we actually get some dreams in, because they're important as well.
To Berlin. And I do want to add a few comments here, though, before, because it might be an wasted opportunity, uh, in a sense. But it is the travel to Berlin, the crossing of the forgotten border patrols, the travel through no man's land, the history of that part that you took if you traveled as a West German person to Berlin, West Berlin. You weren't allowed to leave the highway. You weren't allowed to stop unless a absolute emergency. You're not allowed to speak to anyone leaving the highway. There's patrols and guard towers every now and then. Um, there's fences still kind of like intact across the road. There are these rest stops that were only later kind of built and adopted for a short intermediate rest on the long voyage and to fuel up, which was then heavily watched and monitored by Stasi and, the East German police, in order to ensure that there was no contact between the Klassenfeind. And yeah, it can be a very topical and thematically great setup because that drive should feel desolate. It should feel that you feel the past people who've died at the border crossings, the ghosts of those people who try to seek freedom. Because there will be so much more death in the future, but like for the campaign setting, you're crossing now between two cultures, two conflicting ideologies that are only getting more divergent and more different as we continue to play. So this stretch of 5 hour drive, 6 hour drive, depending on what car or how mode of transport, is an emotional roller coaster, especially if your characters are from Germany and they are from either East or West Germany, especially when they're from East Germany. That travel should be heartbreaking. Maybe one of their family members died trying to flee. They've heard of murders that happened on that stretch of land because neither police would communicate to each other, so they never knew it. There's a famous case that happened there where a body of a woman was found beheaded, but they couldn't identify her because West and East German police wouldn't cooperate because the body was found in East Germany, but the woman was West German, so they wouldn't share the information, and it took years and years to kind of uncover actually what happened. Um, it's a fantastic stretch of not written down, but like thematically cult as fuck material. And I encourage you to kind of read up, and we're going to put a couple of links for reference here as well. There's some really good material about the stretch of land that connects these and the streets that connect East and West Germany. Um, so yeah, these are just my 2 cents before we come to Berlin. Anything to add?
I think here are some media recommendations for those of us who don't know the first thing about German history will be really useful, right? And especially if there's, is there any good fiction about this? Because it sounds like it should be ripe for you know,
I mean, I
a
don't know
dark.
how many German speaking followers and viewers we have, but the very first German crime show that aired was Tatort. And the very first episode was a taxi to Dresden. And it dealt specifically with that case of like a West German police officer having to travel to East Germany privately to talk to potential witnesses and um, family members of a killed person. And it is such a good cinematography, like because it captured literally that time period so well. Um, I will look if I can find somewhere a resource that might be still available for this, but it is one of the most thematical one. Otherwise, I know a couple of references. I just need to double check, and I will post them as well. But this is a very fantastic setting. And again, if your characters have declared they're living in East and West Germany, don't underestimate the travel. The travel itself is is a piece of German history that happened and that influences and sets the mood so much because while you transition from a West German Hamburg that is reigned by punks, by neon lights of the red light district in the Reeperbahn, of booze and alcohol and celebration, you're traveling through no man's land, basically like this just empty strip of street. Nothing left and right for miles and miles, just fields. And then you see on the horizon Berlin appearing. Such good imagery. Don't waste that. It might take you some time to kind of dig into it, but it's so emotional and so connected to the characters that you can incorporate so well. And then you can think of the amount of times that Magda traveled back and forth between those two countries was abandoned from one to the other. It is a fantastic connection. So don't undermine this one, two, three, four, 5 lines that says to Berlin. It is actually a significant part of German history and shouldn't be undermined.
And I guess here, we can, if we were to make wishes for all the beautiful, suggestions and box text, etc., that we would have loved. I guess some, because there is a little box text for where you arrive in Berlin that talks about, the future and the reunification, and it's sort of like, it's sounds a little bit hopeful in a way, and it would be it makes a beautiful contrast, I guess, to put those things together. And
Well, I
yeah,
guess if our listeners would be interested in that, in kind of a short zine type of event here, and they're telling us this, I might be willing to kind of put together something with a couple of my German colleagues, to have maybe some idea about how that travel works.
and I guess if you want the sort of minimalist option of, because you mentioned this before, to me before, like sort of like, oh, how important this should be, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna at least, I at least went and read the Wikipedia, right, and I made a little spiel for my players where I just sort of talked a little bit about this piece of history, which of course a bunch of Swedes basically did not know so much about, and just that little thing, gave a little bit of an oh. I think, and exactly the same reaction that I had just now on this very podcast. So just even a little bit goes a long way here, and makes you look like a history genius when in my case I had just read Wikipedia really.
But okay, let's move on to Berlin,
To
the
Berlin,
city
yes.
of excitement and the Brandenburger Gate, now reuniting the two Germanys. Berlin. What about
Yes.
Berlin strikes you the first? What was your kind of introduction when they kind of moved to Berlin? Did you start maybe in session 0 or before with the character generation in Berlin already?
Yes, so a couple of characters actually are no, actually almost all of them are living in Berlin. And the two of them are from West, and one of them is from East Berlin. And then we have one who lives in Hamburg, and I guess after this part of the campaign is never going to see their relationships and the NPCs that are anchored in Hamburg again. No, that's an exaggeration, of course, that are going to come up. But anyway, so yes, we had a little bit of flashbacks situated in Berlin. We had, at this point, we were several sessions in, so we had flashbacks with Magda in Berlin from her old bookstore, and from one of the characters walking their dog and so on. But the way I started the to Berlin part was, they arrive at a train station, and I throw out a bunch of printed photos of different streets, a lot of them with rubble on them. A little bit of the nice places, and a little bit of here is where the wall used to be, and here, to sort of give
In
a
most
bit of a
parts of the
visual
city,
flavor.
it still exists. It's just broken down on the major roadways. Um, but yeah. Okay. So, train station, Bahnhof Zoo, or
Yes, yes.
nah,
And they
of
didn't
course.
spend much time there, but at least you got to say a name and show a picture and so on.
That's
And
great.
I think it led immediately to some jokey scene about going to buy some type of sausage to eat, but that's
A
okay.
Currywurst, yeah. Currywurst Rot-Weiß. Fantastic. Okay, so your characters basically arrived and then headed back to to their apartments and kind of, or did they start the investigation? When did you have them arrive?
I think this was so they left in the morning
Hmm.
on one of the days. I'm not sure which one, like a couple of days.
Sure.
So um, they arrive at like lunchtime, I guess, hence the sausage. And I think the first thing that happened was that they went home to one of the characters, I think, and then they went to call an NPC that we introduced specifically during character creation, Dietrich Fischer,
Mm.
Magda's little brother.
Oh.
Actually, he is, in fact, not Magda's little brother. He is a somewhat younger person, a child that Magda met during one of these camps, and then she after they sort of both came to Germany and both were discharged from the Frankfurt clinic, she sort of felt kind of a connection to and responsible for.
Hmm.
And there is sort of this dynamic that we have with Dietrich. Magda has had problems with authorities all her life, sort of in different ways, and she's been in and out of psychiatric hospitals and so on. But Dietrich is actually um, sort of Dietrich is doing relatively well. He is sort of relatively stable, and he is sort of there. We had this sort of scenes that established that Magda is very, very proud of him and very, very protective of him, and so on.
Okay.
So they go to contact him immediately to tell him that something is wrong with Magda, and can you meet us at her apartment? And he does. So that means that he is present once they find her.
Okay. I guess this is another option to the books recommended Arnold Weiss from um, Hamburg. But yeah,
Yes.
I think that's much more connected and more um, well placed there at that point. Yeah.
It's one of those, I guess, a little bit like Irene. You can
Yeah.
sort of mix and match, and if you have an NPC in the whole relationship graph, I guess, that you can replace with your own, you can always do that. And I don't know if this is going to come up, but I'm hoping that Dietrich is also going to be able to help if they, see him more after the hospital. We don't know. Reveal a bit more backstory, and maybe have a
Hmm.
moment where he tells them that he's in fact not her little brother at all, and so on.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. How much does he know of the backstory in general? Just for my
Yeah, that's a
reference.
good point. I think he doesn't know so much, actually. I think he's going to have vague memories of
Mm.
Kalenko's orphanage, but not much more than that. So I'm
Okay.
sort of imagining that I think they're going to be able to know that Magda was connected to Kalenko, but they don't know that yet. So he might be one option in there.
Hmm. Okay.
Anyway, so
Uh,
yeah. So, and then they went to his apartment, or to Magda's apartment.
yeah, because they had the keys, right?
In fact, they didn't,
Oh,
because they
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 didn't go to the
didn't
kitchen.
they didn't swipe the keys because a neighbor was there looking at them, sort of following
Oh,
them around inside the apartment.
you made it extra complicated.
Yeah,
Um, okay. Y Let me think. I think, yeah, after the travel through no man's land, they that with a very strange and emotional encounter that I might add to a written version. I think they went to each individual apartments. They just wanted it like some time apart, but they exchanged contact information. Um, and obviously then they just wanted to sleep over it, and that wasn't a great idea. So they felt terrified and absolutely awful the next day, and they quickly called each other and met up, and just a random cafe in Berlin. So they decided, okay, well, we need to do something. We need to see if Magda is truly here or if something else happened. They knew that Magda was picked up by some guys in the middle of the night, and so they um, had the keys from the Hamburg apartment. The only complication I added was more narrative driven based on the characters and their backstories, which I can't really disclose in a public podcast. It is very dark. It is very dark. It involves children and it involves certain tendencies. So it went to the point when the characters arrived at Magda's apartment, and one of the neighbors saw kind of them as a potential issue, um, and was quite suspicious when they approached with a key. And as all, neighbors in Berlin are still, he was like, "Oh, what's going on there? What are you doing? You're not that woman who lives there. What do you want here?" And so I introduced the nosy neighbor, I think, in Berlin.
You gotta have suspicious neighbors in at least one of the two locations, right?
I 100% agree. I think Hamburg was just like too lazy and too laissez-faire. And then Berlin is just like everybody's nosy about everything. And um, it was a very uncomfortable situation for two of the characters. Um, while the third one tried to open the door and get in. And the moment they opened the door, they stumble down the hallway and basically walk into the entrance hall, and they notice on one wall this like massive wooden carved iconography of um, the Madonna holding a child. It looked pretty fresh. And I think, or was it a porcelain? I think I made it a wooden image, but the book says porcelain, but it is a beautiful, massive portrait of the Madonna and child that is kind of facing the player characters. And yeah, one of the characters unfortunately had some issues with religion, so they kind of froze as they saw that imagery. Um, Created a good amount of kerfuffle before then the players actually entered the apartment and then shut the door to the nosy neighbor.
Nice. Can I just ask one thing? Of course, there's no way the player characters would know this at this stage, and we don't know, I guess, hell either. But do you think the image could be painted by Dimi Nestorov?
I was thinking that. It's so that's why I think it was more a wood carving than a porcelain figure, because I think later on, yes, when we're in Dreamlandingrad and the Black Cathedral, I have like wood chiseling tools and stuff, chisels there, and frames and wooden carvings there. So like, I think, and then I pretty much envisioned like she picked it up on a flea market or something, but it was made by Nesterov.
Yeah.
Because porcelain requires too much attention to detail and equipment, but like wood carvings, he can do that in a church.
We talked about this a little bit off camera that maybe the art in Magda's apartments here is it we could do more with it than what is in the text, at least, right? Because of
Exactly.
course Philip Kramer is also a painter, so a Kramer painting somewhere would be interesting as well, to sort of add in.
Exactly. And I think in Berlin, actively had a compartment in her cellar that were where she stored all the iconography and the pictures that she took off. I still imagined her to be kind of semi-Russian Orthodox, although she might not believe, but like a lot of these imagery could be found. And so a lot of those have been like partially rotten amongst the damp cellars in Berlin. But a few of those paintings I described as, good attempts of an artist to kind of picture something religious themed and stuff. But at that time, they didn't really make the connection of Philip being an artist. So like, yes, I thought of this already, that to put Philip Kramer's pictures in her basement and she couldn't look at them anymore. But
Mm.
when she left Berlin, she left Berlin in a state of shock, or she wanted to get everything behind. At some point, she took all the stuff from Philip away, but then he came back into her life, and so she was too weak to pick them up again. But then he convinced her maybe to move to not be close to them. So there's a lot of like my background thinking of exploiting kind of the narrative a bit, to kind of make things make sense of the player's action at that point. But I feel like it also makes sense for Magda to have had that doubt at some point when you have at least remnants of religious iconography in her apartment, but then she's not a believer. So if she's a believer, then she would also ask at some point, why is God punishing me for this? So why do I trust in God, right? So the religious questioning begins. She doubts that her religion helps, so she needs to just distance herself. She puts first the pictures in the cellar to kind of just like get rid of it, but she can't really move the Madonna. She's unable to kind of, it has too much connection to her. She doesn't know why, but it's still there. But all of the other paintings she needs to get rid of, and that's why I kind of describe the rest of the rooms kind of with like these spots, where paintings and frames
Mm.
were. And so she left then. She brings everything to the basement. It doesn't help. She's still getting sicker. All the doctors think she is like hypochondriac. She's like, screw this. I'm moving to Hamburg. I still have the apartment. And then she just leaves, and she leaves pretty much everything in the state that she's in. Um, Philip might have kind of tried to convince her otherwise, but like, that's the thing. Like, either Philip tried to move her to Hamburg to get in safe distance to not be exposed to his fate, or he tried to convince her to stay to be closer so he can protect her. Which I'm still not sure which one of those works, but both of them can be narratively exploited depending on, I would say, mainly how characters dive into this and what characters' interpretation is. I think both make sense. It doesn't matter. You don't have to, you know, pick one. You just go with what, if the players decide like it's much more fun this way, then go with that.
Yes, yes, because it is sort of notable how Magda kind of moves back and forth, like between the two. And
She
in
even
in
states so in the first meeting.
yes,
I've,
yes,
I've I've
exactly.
came from Berlin, but now I'm in Hamburg. I came to Hamburg because I'm sick. I need doctors to tell me why I'm sick. All of the Berlin doctors are quacks. They don't know what's going on. They don't see it. But also, I don't believe that this is what God had intended for me. So,
It's true, all of the Berlin doctors except the pathologist, and it's just a shame that the pathologist doesn't see, in this case, doesn't really see living people so much. Um, but we will get there, I guess. I think this apartment is also where we see. This is where we find like the last piece of the diary, which is the one where the entries that, or the excerpts that the book contains, they are all from that one, like from like the last year. So sort of describing the disease progression and so on. And I guess to your earlier point, it would be lovely to have some earlier excerpts as well that touch on important points, but at least these ones paint a pretty stark and disturbing picture of Magda's disease progression. And at this point, of course, the characters should know that they didn't just have a normal fever. They have had horrible dreams. They have had some of these early symptoms. And at least in my run, this is the point where, one of them says, more or less literally, "Oh shit, this is what's going to happen to us." Well, that's true. That is,
I mean, it's not
textually
wrong.
what's going to happen to them.
Yep.
And they get a timeline as well, which is not really going to be followed and is not very encouraging, even if it is, right? You have like less than a year,
Exactly.
I think this is also where we get the Slavic association clues sort of starting to come in, right, with the magazine.
Well, yes, the magazines of the Slavic Association, as well as obviously the most powerful excerpt and handout in the whole thing, which is the Power of Dreams by Kramer.
Yes.
But we'll come to that in a second. But I think, yes, one of the things that comes to mind is obviously if they explore everything but the bedroom first, they'll get a good idea about Magda's kind of lifestyle in Berlin. She was a writer. She wrote in a book. She had old manuscripts and articles written and prepared. And I think you mentioned that in some form, her manuscript on a computer encompassed like this. They call it Angstladen novel set in 1930s Russia.
Yeah.
That you kind of repurposed to your liking here.
Yes, because even if my players mercifully did not try to read the entirety of the diaries like yours did, they did print Magda's novel. So I grabbed some of the flavor text from the opening chapter and put that on an excerpt and sort of said, here's the beginning of a chapter, which I think worked. Though I'm not sure that they actually made the connection that little Marsha, who's described there, is actually Magda, and that this is autobiographical in some way. But I'm sure with the future dreams and so on, that point is going to be hammered home.
I'm pretty sure it will. Yeah. So, yeah, in her office, they find a computer. They find like a conspiracy board of like articles in draft forms and so forth that are a bit out of date, definitely, because she got sick before she can actually fulfill them. But most importantly, I think it's in the living room or somewhere. There are the serialized contain, or in her office. No, in her office are the journals or the editorial of the Slavic Forum, the Slavic Association newspaper. And as I said earlier, that's one of the issues that was previously written. I think it's the one issue that she kept in her car before she left, just to kind of maintain kind of the pace when players kind of understand when she moved from Berlin to Hamburg. But yeah, these indicate pretty much the structure of a organization to help Russian immigrants and refugees in Germany to reassociate with their identity, um, aid and provide legal aid in their efforts, and do anything they can to help their Russian comrades to survive in this hostile land. Um, and yeah, so the Slavic Association is introduced. What do we know at that point about the Slavic Association from the
Almost,
handouts in her apartment?
yeah, almost nothing, right? We learn who are on the board, right? That and that Magda is on it. Um, Let me just quickly check. Do we actually get? We do get that Sasha Pogodin is um, the the chair, right?
Yeah,
I
that's what
think
I'm
so.
also
I
sort of
think
what
so.
I'm looking at. I think it's later mentioned at the uh, Slavic Association chapter what the order and the leadership organization is.
We get that we get that Magda Orlova has been
Yeah,
elected vice president, and we get their address as well. But maybe we
their
don't
address.
actually
Yeah.
get no, maybe we don't actually get the connection to the others. But of course, we get that from the diary, so that's fine.
The diaries, and I still would think that the editorial board, producer and everybody would be on there. Um,
Yeah, I
so.
think, and in my case, and maybe this is giving away too much, but I actually decided that one of the player characters who had a relationship with Magda back in the day and who already knew about Philip and so on.
Mm.
I gave him a little flashback scene where he actually did hear at some point at some sort of salon that was held in Magda's apartment that they were thinking of starting this sort of literary association was what it was back then.
Mm.
That's not the way it's interpreted in the book, but I put more emphasis on that and talked about the Slavische literarische um, whatever Verein, I think was the word I used.
Oh,
Um, and he never knew really what it was about, and he didn't really know what these guys were up to. But I sort of planted the seed that they were all
mhm.
founding members, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that is important just to make sure the players are aware of that organization. And I'm pretty sure I added the elements of Marla at least being the head or lead editorial or something. Um,
Yeah, makes sense.
and I also I actually created some handouts of myself for the bookshelves, which contain the Compendium Somnia by Philip Honigberg, Sogni Segreti by Caspar Cicerelli, and Somnia ex Inferno by Andronicus.
Oh yeah, yeah, because here's where we actually find some of Magda's occult books.
Exactly.
Yes.
And obviously, my occult librarian couldn't refuse to kind of look into those. So I sat down and actually wrote kind of like excerpts and like details of what these books are about, and uh, gave the character like, oh, okay, so Magda knows about something else. She knows about something weird is going on.
And I think that's
And
actually what
yeah.
you're saying now. I think that's a very important point that is a little bit of a tension here. Like we get a pretty good impression of Magda. She seems to be an upstanding character, and she's been very, player characters probably only know good things about her. And then we're going to see very gradually that she is associated with the Slavic Association, which we will very soon, if we're suspecting it already, but we'll very soon see are doing some very very shady things. And she's been quite deep into this like occult business that you know I mean, Kramer and Mahler and Godin are all like, black magicians in the sense. They're
Yep.
yeah. How do we actually reconcile that with our view of Magda? That's an interesting challenge for the characters, I think.
I think given the exposure that the players had to Magda in her later time frame, um, and depending on when they saw her last, um, the idea of her studying the occult could have been kind of shifted to it is for her writing, it's for her publishing that she needs to kind of look into those. She might have mentioned that even before, like, oh, I'm looking into this because uh, a friend told me about this and I should look into this. We know who those friends are. These points of her occultism, I think, are I think the one point that I like to leave unexplained because we don't really know what drove her to this. Maybe it's her, her dissolvement into death that this curse kind of puts upon her, that she kind of crosses all her journalistic boundaries and says, I need to know where this came from. And I think this is the most cohesive one that makes sense in my mind because that's why we find Philip Kramer's Power of Dreams book next to her next to her bed. Um, but otherwise, it's very hard to kind of see any sort of occultist elements. It's more, for me, Magda was more a religious, pious person, a I don't want to call her zealous, but like she, I think, overcompensated to the end, maybe due to the remnants of whatever Binna left in her. Um, Me that feeling that she misses of not being an incarnate of Binna anymore. But like clearly they wouldn't have driven her to occultism because that would have led her down the path of her friends. Um, and that's why I think for me, there's a strong balance between explaining Magda's occultism and leaving it literally just as is. Because I have no explanation for it. I have ideas, as I just mentioned, but that's all I can offer.
Yeah, and we also get sort of, I guess, here and there, we realize from the diaries and so on that Magda was involved early when maybe the Slavic association was, well, certainly the Slavic association was something completely different than what it has become today. And we have her remarks where she's saying that she participated in some ritual and it was all
Rituals.
very
Yeah,
harmless and she's not really taking this so seriously. Uh,
exactly.
but she still had nightmares afterwards, which I think is a very nice touch. Um,
That is a great point. Yeah. So, uh, a believer or non-believer. Um, yeah, I think otherwise the apartment itself is very. It's one of the few locations that is very concise and very well described. There's not really any open questions, as I said, or as I think. Um,
no,
Leaving
here,
us. Yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
I was to say here, yes, here so far everything is relatively straightforward. Then
Yeah.
things become more complicated later, maybe, but yes.
I mean, I think that things become weird the moment we open room number 7 in
Yes.
the Berlin apartment, which is her bedroom. Martin, can you give us a bit of a narrative scene? How would you introduce the characters entering the apartment?
Yes, yes, and how
Oh,
did I
the
in
bedroom.
fact how did I in fact introduce this? Well, I don't really remember, but of course I tried very hard at this point, right? Because this is to me one of the big scenes, and I had been looking forward to it for a while. Um, so here's where we find Magda very close to being killed by this stream parasite. And because the characters are, as the book says, they are infected, so they can now see the symptoms of this dream parasite in others. They see reality in this room, I guess, as it truly is, or at least as it pertains to the woman who is on the bed. And she is being eaten by all these little black worms with their golden. It's like golden eyes, or is it the other way around? The worms are gold, but they have little black eyes that are sitting inside of these big pustules that are growing on her. And it's the scene where everything is sort of moving and writhing, and they are like eating her, and the whole thing becomes if you like sort of gnarly body horror, this I guess is one of the big ones. And she is not really conscious, but she is like rambling. In my interpretation, she was talking a mixture of German and Russian. Very few words that are intelligible, but of course some that pertain to her backstory and so on. And the characters, to their credit, I guess, they call for. No, actually, they don't call for an ambulance immediately. Dietrich does, because of course, poor Dietrich doesn't actually see what's going on. He only sees his adopted older sister very, very ill. And once paramedics arrive and start rushing in and start doing like CPR on Magda without sort of seeing the pustules and the pus that's coming on them, and the worms and so on. And also the worms make some kind of like weird music, right? That's sort of like a choir sort of singing in the background. That was actually, I guess, the big moment, end of session. So we ended on that cliffhanger where the player characters sort of realized that the paramedics and the little brother actually don't see what's actually going on.
Fantastic. And maybe we use that same description, the same imagery as you just described, to just say that we're gonna call it for today, and we're gonna pick up next week. Because I think this chapter is just too big to put this in one episode of our podcast, and we want to do it justice. And I think next week we're gonna pick up with the aftermath of the Berlin apartment, and what happens next for our players. So far, thank you for listening. I'm David.
And I'm Martin.
And we're trying to give you a deep dive into the Black Madonna, the most notorious, infamous, and weirdest campaign of Kult Divinity Lost that is out there. So if you liked it, let us know. If you have any questions, any suggestions, any questions that you want to ask to be addressed, please let us know as well. You can usually find me, and probably Martin as well, on the Illusion Horror and Con Discord server. Links in the description below. And otherwise, we're just starting to branch out in various other social media, so stay tuned and just look down in the descriptions to wherever you are available on. Thank you very much for listening, and see you next week.